Welcome to the Productivity Podcast. This is episode 2 with our friends at Sims and Associates, and today we're going to talk about WFM Pilot and Rollout. So in episode 1, we did all the what do you do once you've chosen your WFM solution and how do you get set up for success. We'd assume that you've done all that. Now we're going to move into the pilot rollout phase of the project. Delighted to say that Michael, Mal and Fabio are back for another chat and to share some of their amazing insights. So we'll kind of get straight into the detail, and we'll come to you first, Michael. Lots of organisations talk about pilots in WFM and, in fairness, other technical solutions. In your mind, is a pilot? So in true definition, if it doesn't work, you turn it off and kind of walk away. It's a larger scale proof of concept, or actually is it normally just phase 1 rollout with a bit more support and getting out all the kind of demons that may exist in the software?
Well, we see both, but for it to be a pilot, it would have to have an evaluation stage at the end, which at least would have some kind of go, no go, and a review with the senior stakeholders for me to be called a pilot. And if it's effectively just an implementation, be it at a smaller scale, that is followed by further implementation, then it's not a pilot, as far as I'm concerned.
And do people, because certainly in WFM, my experience tells me that you have to invest, even for a pilot, a lot of the effort prior to that to get the configuration right, whether it be for 4, 10, 400 stores. So do people really have that go, no-go decision, or is the decision more what things do we need to change before we roll it out to a wider audience?
It could be both, actually, Simon. I mean, we've done a pilot recently, which effectively was the implementation at one small country. They've completed the pilot, and they're currently evaluating, looking at the lessons learned, and that's a very important step, because as we touched on yesterday with workforce management implementation, this is not just a technical installation. It's not just a software tool. It's a set of processes. It often requires a lot of change management. And so it is a complex implementation that touches many aspects of the organization. So that evaluation is critical.
Excellent. And Mal, what's your experience with pilots? Do they roll into implementation, or again, do you see those kind of stage gates where people will do a review and pause, stop, make changes?
I think it's a little bit fuzzy. Pilots and phase 1s tend to fuzz together quite a lot. Most of the work is definitely done ahead of time, and it's really tweaking according to regional or individual requirements that could occur through, probably not industry changes, but country changes or region changes.
And what kind of lessons or things do you typically see come out of those pilots? What are there change management training things that come out? Are there system configuration changes?
I think it's a combination of both. I think there needs to be a little bit of give and take in most situations. When people start using the solution in earnest, you discover little hidden things or unknown things that around how people operate that we didn't realize in earlier stages that we need to either accommodate into the solution or work out a way for them to adapt their processes instead. So I think it's a bit of both.
So a good learning platform for the change team and the technical implementation team. Fabio, in your experience, is there good pilot selections and poor pilot selections? Does that have a big influence on the success of the pilot and the learnings?
Yes, of course. I mean, that is going to make all the difference. Because not only you need clear criteria to make sure that your pilot is successful or not, but you need to choose a representative population or a representative sample of your whole population. Otherwise, you are going to face issues in the actual rollout that were not uncovered in the pilot or in user acceptance testing or whatever other kind of testing you have. So it is fundamental that you do that. And we have, of course, seen both cases, very good pilots that just almost seamlessly roll out or allow us to roll out to the rest of the organization, and the opposite, which is a pilot that has been done maybe without a lot of planning, and that at the end of the day, it just allows us to, identify a lot of the issues that had not been uncovered, but maybe when it's a little bit too late. So, of course, pilot group selection is vital.
And that selection, I assume, can be physical, should take into account physical things. So if you're, I don't know, a supermarket, large stores, small stores, maybe different floors or different layouts, different specialist departments that need different manning. But I also, as well, hear things like, put it in this store because this manager's tricky. They don't really believe in it. So if they can do it, then that proves anybody can do it. And adversely, we'll put it in this store because they're a great manager. So you almost know they're going to do it anyway. Do you see those things come through?
And that is also related to change management. You are constantly looking for ambassadors of a solution within an organization. So of course, depending, you can have site leaders or store managers or line leaders in manufacturing that are going to be friendlier and more open to being part of pilot, and that then can let you transmit the message to the other parts of the organization. But that needs to be well balanced with the fact that you need to have your pretty much all your use cases represented in your pilot. So it's not enough to go with friendly managers. They also need to have control of a population that is representative of what your business is actually going to need in the future. So if you don't have any complexity, or if you miss any of the complexity in the pilot, you're going to have to deal with that during the rollout, and that can be tricky.
Okay, so a nice blend, cover all your requirements, cover all the different types of people. Michael, in your experience, do you see organisations that heavily support the pilot store? So maybe have people from the project team in there for a long period of time. And how do you get that balance of supporting them because it's new to the whole business, but almost making it representative that you can't supply that intensive care support to maybe every further location in rollout? How do you find that balance?
I think to answer that, I also have to sort of bridge back to Fabio's point earlier. I do feel that you need representation in the organization, so in the project, in the pilot, not just from supporting managers, supporting representatives, but also from people who provide resistance. Because if you can't resolve the resistance within a small pilot group, then you certainly won't succeed when you do a larger scale rollout. So I think that is key. And I've found in the past where I've done these pilots, you get such a varied discussion also between the supporters and the people who are less supportive within the project group, that it throws up all kinds of aspects that you, as a third party, certainly not necessarily have considered.
The kind of less supportive people, does there come a point when you kind of have to draw a line and say this is what it is, this is what's going to happen, we need to find ways for you to get on board and run with it? Because there must come a point when you can only make so many changes, or the solution can only do so many things.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And that's why you also need governance in place. So if somebody raises a challenge, an objective, a barrier to the successful conclusion, and you can't resolve it within the project team, then that needs to be raised within the steering group. And it might lead to a change in the objectives of the pilot, or it needs to be parked, or in some way it needs to be resolved at a higher level. Because certainly as a third party, we can't resolve it for them.
So it comes back to that kind of senior leadership buy-in, or whether the senior stakeholder or sponsor is driving that message through the organisation that it's not particularly optional whether you use this solution or not moving forward, and you'll do all you can to listen to resolve any issues. But clearly there comes a point when cost, time, pressure, functionality kind of is what it is. So Mal, if we've done a pilot and we've kind of got to the point where we're 80, let's say nothing's ever 100%, 80% happy, and we've made some tweaks to maybe the training plan and the material and some configuration changes, is there a natural transition from pilot to rollout? What kind of does that planning piece look like? How do you think about number of locations you might roll out in a week? What typical things and activities happen in that? Right, we think this is going to roll. What's next?
I suppose that comes down to what's achievable with the people that we have involved in the project, both on the consulting side and on the client side as well. People, we need to be able to support the new locations effectively. I guess really the customer hopefully should be able to support those new locations effectively as they're being turned on and going live. Seems to be the most important thing to me, because we should be handing over the reins as much as possible during that process to make the client more accountable.
And have you ever seen instances where almost people have done a phase one pilot, so it's intensive care, hyper support, then they've almost done a smaller, let's call it, initial rollout to test what it looks like without that intensive support, because it's just not sustainable as you maybe roll out 5, 10, 15, 100 stores a week?
I haven't seen that, no, but that certainly makes sense. I mean, you're definitely going to get a major influx of support requirements during the initial weeks or an initial whatever period of time. So a big bang would not be feasible if the customer is doing it all themselves. So a piecemeal approach really has to be applied in most situations, I would think.
And I know in episode 3 we're going to talk about what happens post implementation, which for me is one of the most crucial parts. Lots of projects, regardless of WFM, are great when you've got a dedicated team and everyone's excited about it and it's something new, and then it moves into business as usual and it maybe gets lost or there's a focus for a new project. But how do you cater for kind of change requests or things that come through as you're still rolling out? Is that, Fabio, something that you part to the end, or does the WFM system keep evolving forever and a day?
Well, I think it depends on criticality and how it's going to impact usage of the tool or the system that we are implementing. What we would, of course, in an ideal world, try to keep this to a minimum. And if we work well on documentation, making sure that understanding and validation of our understanding of those requirements that we are receiving throughout the project is correct, then we should be able to keep this to a minimum. But sometimes, just during pilot or just before going live or immediately afterwards, we will be hit with a change, something that we missed or the customer missed. That is fine. And we just need to know if this is something that needs to be tackled now, maybe because it, for example, affects payroll or any other outcome from the system, or if this is something more related to a nice to have and that we can park that for the future. So both scenarios are feasible.
And I think it was Mal, maybe you mentioned this before, around when as a customer, so if I'm the customer now and you're helping me implement, and we've also got the solution provider, when should I start to feel self-sufficient? When should I start to be saying, actually, no, I'll make those changes and I'll come back to you if I need to be? Is that as we roll out? Is that at the start of pilot, as we transition out of pilot? And I get it might be different for different customers based on the size of their teams, but what do you see as typical or best practice?
I think the learning process needs to start immediately. So as we're developing requirements and working through some workshops to show what the solution can do based on what we understand of their requirements, that should be beginning right then to show the right people where that's happening in the solution, so that they're learning gradually as we progress. I feel like during the pilot stage, that's when their technical people should be able to be stretching their legs a little bit and getting into the configuration to see where things are happening, and if needed, start making those changes for themselves at that point. Obviously with support, but it's awesome seeing clients who are able to do that during the pilot stage.
Michael, what's your experience in terms of that transition to self-support or less reliance on software provider and implementation teams?
Sorry for the silence. I'm just thinking, because in my experience, we're also heavily involved in the period after the pilot in terms of assisting in the evaluation of the results, helping to create an inventory of lessons learned, so what worked, what didn't, what needs to change. Then ultimately, the go, no-go decision is, of course, an internal affair. But to help determine what worked and what didn't work, and how, very importantly, how to overcome some of the challenges that they've identified in pilot phase, and what it means, what the effort would be to overcome those, to resolve those. That's very much something that we're involved in. So I think often pilot, both in terms of the preparation, the execution, as well as the period after the pilot, there's some involvement from us.
Do you see the same, Fabio, and you've experienced the same in that kind of, maybe that some of the work that you do changes, becomes more strategic, but the client's doing more of the kind of day-to-day management?
Yes, and I think it goes back to the responsibilities matrix on this, because, and this is something that we will discuss at the beginning of every project, but there are stages of the project in which our role changes dramatically as consultants. So we own configuration, for example, but we support testing and we support hypercare. So we stop owning that part, and it's crucial that the customer is capable and comfortable owning the solution that has been implemented after go live, or after having gone live. So our role will definitely change, and we will be there to support, but we are no longer owning that part of the project. So that also needs to be very clear from the beginning, and the roles do change, and it takes a little bit of taking used to, of course.
So it sounds like, again, back in episode 1, we talked about the governance, we talked about setting up the project team, making sure that things are really clear. And I think it was yourself, Fabio, again, that talked about the governance meetings, and you'd review the why you were doing this every time and the expected outcomes. It sounds like that is just so critical based on our conversation today of rollout, pilot, because lots of things are pinned back to that. So the criticality of the setup, the project team, the governance, the expectations of who's responsible for which parts of the project, where that transitions out, where maybe your roles as implementation consultants morph into and change and transform into something different. So I don't know, Mal, if you agree with that this is all well, and we'll finish this episode with we've done a great pilot and we've rolled out, we'll focus on post-implementation support. But it seems to me the criticality was almost everything we discussed in episode 1.
Absolutely. I mean, having everything in place so that you have a sustainable solution, sustainable processes and practices in place as we're handing across to the customer, for sure.
Brilliant. So we'll just come back around everybody for some final thoughts then. So if we start with you, Fabio, any final tips and thoughts on that move from pilot through rollout for customers that may be listening, or potential customers?
I think that the most important part here is to make sure that the customer has an organization that can own that support, they are going to be the ones facing their end users. So they need to be well trained, and they need to understand what we are doing and why things are happening in the system and as part of the overall business. So if that project team is well prepared, has been engaged throughout the project, has been a critical part of testing, and we have gone through a proper pilot group selection, it should be simpler. These are projects that have a large impact in most organizations, so it's never going to be just your regular day in the park, but there are things that you can do to make that a little bit easier.
Brilliant. Michael, final thoughts from you?
Yeah, so building on what Fabio said, I mean, those initial people need to be very well trained. You can't overdo that, because they will be the ambassadors going forward for a full rollout. Equally, typically in a pilot, I see there's a focus on testing the software tool, the technical capability and the technical fit. And there's almost an of too little focus, I should say, on the cultural change, on the change management side. So make sure that has a role in the pilot as well.
Brilliant. And last but not least, Mal, final thoughts?
I completely agree with that. I think the change piece is such a huge part of this whole process, change and training, making sure that people are aware of what's changing, making sure there is a positive vibe out there, or at least a vibe of some description out there, and people know what they need to do and how they need to do it. And I guess that ties into having really strong, good, positive leadership across this with governance in place too.
Brilliant. So some great thoughts to finish on there. So we'll pause and finish episode 2 here. So in episode 1, we've already selected our WFM solution, and we've done all the governance and set the team up and thought about how it's all going to work, which was brilliant. We've, in episode 2, done a pilot. That's been great and rolled out, and we've completed our implementation across the estate. So in episode 3, we'll focus on the post-implementation support, which I think is critical and maybe one of the things which gets ticked and everybody moves on, the project team disappears, and potentially not given as much thought or importance as maybe it should. So be interesting to get back together, guys, and hear your thoughts in episode 3. Until then, thank you very much again.
Thank you.
Thanks, Simon.
Thank you.